Welcome back to another episode, yes, long awaited, of the series 100 Tips That Only a Grandmaster Knows. As you may have seen, we were on a little bit of an uploading hiatus, but we are 100% back now. Just had to sort out some new editors, but we got tons of content ready to go. So I hope you guys are ready to learn something new. Let's get right into it. This is the pawn structure we're talking about, and today's tip revolves entirely around queen on g4 with this pawn structure. And really what I mean is with this pawn on e5. This is going to control the f6 square, which means either your opponent's knight on g8 cannot develop there, or it, was on f6 and it had to move to d7. So the knight will be somewhere here anyway. The g4 square will be available. And by hitting this pawn, you're causing a lot of discomfort because your opponent is likely going to have their bishop already developed to e7, to c5, maybe trade it off for something. No matter where it is, the g7 pawn is going to be hanging. So let's say here. And to defend that pawn is actually really uncomfortable. Playing g6, you start to worry about all the weaknesses that you've just created. And, rook g8 is just kind of a crazy move. Most people want to castle kingside. So you're probably thinking, okay, well, this is not that impressive. What if they castle kingside? Well, as I continue to add pieces to the board here, you just have to imagine, of course, there's tons of other pieces, but this is the general plan. Bishop comes to h6, and this always happens when they castle. And the presence of that pawn on e5 means there's usually no way to defend this, no queen f6 or anything, which means they have to lose material here, and you can take that rook. So because of that threat, castling is not usually a reliable way to defend this, and so black is stuck between, do I give it up? Do I play g6 and create those weaknesses? Do I bring the bishop or king to f8, something crazy? It's really uncomfortable to deal with defending this g7 pawn, and the g4 square is made available with that pawn on e5. If you look at this structure, you can imagine maybe a few openings where you see it, so I'll show you a few of those positions and also an example game of why this is so effective, and it's something that you should be looking out for in your games. Also wanted to give an update to the YouTube crowd. We are actually bringing building habits back on stream, which means it will eventually make its way to YouTube, maybe sometime a little bit later this month. So that is very, very exciting. And on a related note, I was also pretty excited when Magic Mind reached out. They sent over some products, and ultimately they ended up sponsoring today's video. I kind of started 2025 on a little bit of a wellness kick myself. So honestly, when Magic Mind reached out, I was like, this is perfect because it's one thing building habits in chess, but obviously that also applies to your body as well. So I can show you guys the box. Came in this nice, pretty slick packaging, if you ask me. And inside, there's these little bottles. Look kind of like that. And I might just crack one open right now. And that's it. It's just a shot. Over and done with. And this doesn't replace anything in the morning. So if you're a coffee drinker, still have your coffee. These are just like vitamins, but for your mind. So they go alongside with any part of your morning routine. Magic Mind uses nootropics. It's safe to try, and the benefits could be substantial for you. They do ship internationally, but they also sell in stores in the US. You can think of Magic Mind like a tool to enhance your focus and improve your sleep. They have separate wellness shots for each purpose, kind of like a day-night routine. Honestly, I kind of sleep like a log, so I haven't noticed the effects as much of the sleep wellness shot, but I can say I am not a morning person, and after taking the daily shot, I do feel a lot more productive to start my day. You guys can get 45% off the bundle of Magic Mind sleep and wellness shots at magicmind.com/chessbrah. Getting back to the chess, I think the French defense is one of the best examples of this. You can imagine, white's playing e5 and so many variations here. So this is one variation where I see the queen g4 move used really, really often. Knight c3, bishop b4, so the win hour, e5, and just the main line of the entire opening, knight to e7 and queen g4. And we can see all that's really necessary for this pattern to be very effective, and queen g4 is the top move in the position, is just no bishop on f8, and that pawn on e5. That meant that black couldn't play knight f6 to prevent this entirely. g6 is an obvious disaster on the dark squares here for black. This does not look like a good move at all. And castling is actually playable here because bishop h6, there's knight f5, but you can see the makings of disaster castling this way. It looks quite scary with all these bishops aimed over here, and maybe even the pawn can move up and white can launch an attack. So while this might not be 100% effective for this tactic, still you can see bishop h6 is now a threat, and as I said, the attack is going to be very, very serious. So even castling into this, even if you can play that move, is extremely scary. So the queen on g4, once again, does her job. And the French is, whether it's the advanced or in this case the win hour with e5 played, is definitely one of those structures where you can just see this queen g4 present itself a little bit more often. But I also want to point out that sometimes you play queen g4 before the king is castled because you want to pressure that g-pawn. And I'm going to show you an example right now of how that can also be not the case. You can also play it after the king is castled. So let's have a look at this position. This came from an Alpine Sicilian, so pretty normal and common position, I would say. In this spot, white plays queen e2, and big goal in this opening is to play queen e4 and threaten h7, which is exactly what happens here. Black plays the move g6. I mean, pretty much, yeah, the only move, very standard. And just due to that pawn on e5 and with the pressure here, I also wanted to highlight that this g4 square is also just a nice square for that piece to exist. It's a safe square for that queen. So when you have this structure of a rather advanced central pawn, like a pawn on e5, g4 just becomes kind of like a good place for the queen to hang out. No pieces can bother the queen here. As long as you keep that e5 pawn defended, there'll never be a knight coming there. There'll never be a knight going to f6. The e6 pawn can never move. So yeah, g4 is just a really great square. And we can see here, queen g4 is played to get off this diagonal, but it supports ideas like h4, h5. There's clearly nothing happening on this diagonal. And as I said, that e4 square is a little bit dangerous. So the queen just slides on over to g4. And yeah, the rest of the pieces can develop from here, maybe h4, h5. But you may not have thought of that g4 square as such a reliable one if you hadn't seen an explanation like this. So consider that g4 square when you have the pawn on e5, whether or not the king is castled. In this case, the king's already castled. There's no threat on g7, but it's still a great square for your piece. So now I'm going to show you a game that I played. I was actually with the black pieces, but we're going to observe this game from my opponent's POV. He was only 2,500 rated, but he beat me handily in this game, and I have no shame showing you guys because it was a great example of this exact theme. So I have this opening, the Owens, that I like to play. I play with pretty good success, honestly, but yeah, a few mishaps happen from time to time. And I usually play in a specific way where I try to trade off the light squared bishop because of the pawn structure here. And in this case, after queen takes c5, if the queens were exchanged, that would be it. I would be very happy. I definitely wouldn't be better or anything, but that'd be kind of the goal of the opening. My opponent decides to throw in a check, but ultimately understands that the g4 square is the place to be. The pawn's on e5, the bishop has moved. This is a great example. If I push g6, clearly bishop h6 is going to happen. I'm not going to be able to castle. It's going to be really, really uncomfortable. And if I castle, then bishop h6 will just win material. So already this is evaluated at almost +3 by the engine. It's as if I'm down a piece and material's even. So that's how strong this idea is. And honestly, my next move came after a 30-second think. I was completely floored by queen g4. I just wasn't thinking about it. This lateral queen move, usually the queen gets there via d1 to g4, but in this case, kind of snuck along the 4th rank, caught me by surprise, and just look at the tough position I end up in. I can't castle in either direction. I'm trying to make it work here. Even b5, I thought, okay, knight b6, knight d5. I'm making progress here. But white decides to go like that. And look at what's happening to me. Queen d8 is a threat. Castling looks like it's going to get mated immediately. I decide to play knight d5. But at this point, I mean, it was an absolute slaughter. And yeah, I ran out of time here in a dead loss position. But hopefully you get the point. You see what I'm getting at. That queen on g4, there was no good reaction to it. Rook g8, king f8, and these moves are all terrible. G6 was what I went for, but ultimately I couldn't castle. That's the point of this queen g4 move, is you don't let, for the most part, your opponent's castle, because you always have that bishop h6 move nearby. So, I mean, this was a complete crush. I don't even know what to say. I got annihilated in this game, but at the very least, we got to see an instructive moment with queen g4 played there. So hopefully this tip was useful for you. There are a lot of openings, not just the ones that I show here, that you can get this structure in. It's really just that advanced pawn on e5 and the bishop having moved from f8. Obviously, you could think of this from the reverse. Works the same way if black has a pawn on e4 and plays queen g5. But that advanced pawn in the center, that's your key to look for that early queen move, because it's actually such a safe square. No bishops or knights can bother it, and it can inflict a lot of damage from that position. So I hope this tip is useful for you, and a final reminder that you can get 45% off the Magic Mind bundle at magicmind.com/chessbrahjan. And I will see you guys in the next episode.